What?
And all I've got to offer is sensitivity, intelligence, and charm.
This is far from a revolutionary take or observation, but have you noticed that traditionally in horror media, women are ignored? For example, the Amityville Horror. In this 70s movie, not the Ryan Reynolds one, although I guess that one too, but newlyweds and their 3 children move into a home where the previous owners were victims of a mass murder. To the shock of everyone, they start to experience strange occurrences, which have strong negative effects on everyone living in and visiting the home. If you've seen the film, I hope you know where I'm coming from when I say I would actually argue that the husband in this situation is more the hysterical one, sort of a la The Shining. But regardless, it's the mother's concerns that are ultimately ignored as the father kind of loses his mind.
Now listen up. We are Bensons. We will not abandon this camp! Do you understand me?
There's also the lesser-known example of Carnival of Souls. Our main character, Mary Henry, is the sole survivor of a car accident. Trying to put the incident behind her, she moves to Utah, hang out with Mormons, I guess, and takes a job as a church organist. Unfortunately for Mary, she seems to be haunted by the spirit of this creepy man. Visions of this man begin to appear more and more frequently. These visions seem to be drawing her to an abandoned carnival on the outskirts of town. Super cool and normal stuff. Throughout the film, Mary does seek help from her new neighbors. Unfortunately, but expectedly, she's cast off as crazy and traumatized. Or to give more modern examples, and examples that give kind of a different take on the hysterical woman trope. In Insidious and The Conjuring, the female characters have special psychic connections to the malevolent entities. These women are more attuned to the spiritual world than their male counterparts. In Insidious, the mother has a personal connection to the entity. In The Conjuring, Lorraine Warren is seen as a overall conduit. These women are ultimately believed, unlike Mary in Carnival of Souls, but there's also ultimately something wrong with them. The same could be said for Paranormal Activity. Lastly, a movie that kind of turns this trope on its head, and I would wager a movie you've never heard of. The 1986 Polish film I Like Bats. This movie is about a happily single vampire woman who ends up falling in love with a psychiatrist. And oh boy, this movie could have its own video. It's not this video, but it definitely could have its own video. The gist is that this vampire chick tells this psychiatrist that she's a vampire and ends up getting committed in a ploy to get closer to the psychiatrist because he's a real hottie. She uses the hysterical woman trope to her advantage. This obviously ends up backfiring, but this movie is bonkers. And maybe for Spooky Month, I'll make a real video on that. What are they doing outside my apartment? Jeez. All this to prove my point that cinema is filled with hysterical women. These women are often proven right, but it takes a lot of work and sometimes tragedy to get there. Let's talk about the history of lobotomies. The lobotomy was invented in 1935 by Ega Moniz. At the time, he called it a leucotomy. The first procedure was done in November of that same year in Lisbon. Moniz even received a Nobel Prize for his invention in 1949. The procedure was brought over to the United States in 1936 by Walter Jackson Freeman. It was at this time that it was renamed to lobotomy. The goal of a lobotomy was to reduce depression, anxiety, and excess emotions, like being attuned to the spirit world, maybe. A review of the literature on lobotomies in France, Belgium, and Switzerland. A review of the literature on lobotomies conducted in France, Switzerland, and Belgium from 1935 to 1985 revealed that out of 1,340 patients, 84% of them were female. A 1951 study found that 60% of American patients were women. This procedure was overwhelmingly a way to subdue unruly women with excess emotions. However, eventually the lobotomy went out of style. Thank goodness. However, to this day, women are about 2 times as likely to receive an anxiety disorder diagnosis as their male counterparts. And those diagnoses come with prescriptions. The dramatic increase of prescriptions of quote-unquote benzos to primarily white women can be directly linked to the American opioid crisis. A statistically relevant number of premature deaths among white women can be directly linked to the overprescribing of opioids and anti-anxiety medications, most commonly a combination of the two. So we're not doing lobotomies anymore, but I also want to caveat here that I know I've been talking about specifically white women here. Women of color have also suffered greatly. It's just that most of the studies I was able to find were focused on white women, which is a whole nother can of worms. But I recognize that women of color have suffered even more when it comes to barbaric medical procedures. This is far from just a white woman's problem. On that note, you know that one episode of BoJack Horseman? You know the one. Season 4, Episode 2, titled The Old Sugarman Place. In this episode, BoJack's grandmother is lobotomized after the death of her son, Cracker Jack. Following the death of her son, in sort of a grief-filled clarity, she starts to break from misogynist tradition. She starts to allow her daughter, Beatrice, to eat sweet treats rather than watch her figure. In response to this grief and rebellion, BoJack's grandfather turns to lobotomy, stating, "As a modern American man, I am woefully unprepared to manage a woman's emotions. I was never taught, and I will not learn." After the lobotomy takes place, the threat of the procedure hangs over BoJack's mother's, Beatrice's, head. After her favorite doll is thrown into the fire, her father warns her, "Come on now, be strong. You can't let your womanly emotions consume you. You don't want to end up like your mother, do you?" This very thinly veiled threat was a reality for many women living in from the 30s to the 50s. The most famous real-world example is probably the case of Rosemary Kennedy. Rosemary Kennedy was JFK's oldest sister. She developed more slowly than her siblings, taking longer to learn how to walk, talk, etc. However, despite the recommendations of doctors, Joe Kennedy decided to keep her at home, stating, What can they do in an institution that we can't do better for her at home, here with her family? As the child, Rosemary attended public school and struggled greatly to keep up with the other kids. Rose Kennedy called her an affectionate, warmly responsive, and loving girl. She was so willing to try to do her best, so appreciative of attention and compliments, and so hopeful of deserving them. As she grew into an adolescent, the Kennedys ultimately ended up sending her to a private boarding school that was thought to accommodate her needs. The Kennedys were a very competitive family, and Rosemary was very frustrated that she wasn't able to keep up. When the family moved to London, Rosemary was enrolled in a convent school with Montessori programs. This seemed to be a really good fit for Rosemary, and she really flourished, providing, for the first time in her life, some real stability with the support she needed. However, the start of World War II forced the family back to the United States. Now a young adult, Rosemary was growing pretty resentful of the fact that she didn't seem to have the same freedoms as her siblings. She really started to rebel and was shuffled between institutions. Similarly to Bojack's mother, she was rebelling against misogynistic traditions. In November of 1941, Joe Kennedy arranged for a lobotomy to be performed on Rosemary. The procedure, as it often did, failed. Rosemary could no longer walk or talk. Her strong, fiery personality was gone. She was immediately institutionalized and forgotten. Nowadays, we know that the diagnosis of hysteria isn't real, right? Right. However, it's reared its ugly head wearing different clothes. Take, for example, the stance that child-free women must be broken and cold, unfulfilled. Remember the response to this TikTok that Julia Mazer posted? Very innocent stuff here, but the right-wing media went crazy over it. So basically, Julia posts this 92-second TikTok to her 7,000 followers. She posts it, she turns off her phone, she's enjoying her weekend, right? And then professional dog turd Matt Walsh decides to post it on his Twitter account to his more than 2.4 million followers, stating that Julia must be too stupid to realize how depressing this is. Julia stated, "All of a sudden, on Sunday, I started receiving hateful comments, and then I caught wind that he had posted my TikTok. She didn't ask for this. She was just sharing about her child-free weekend." But she must be too stupid, too hysterical to understand what she really wants. Or remember that Chelsea Handler Instagram post? And here's the thing, I don't even like Chelsea Handler. Chelsea Handler has her own problems. She's her own bag of worms. But she makes this post, right? And she's like, "I'm happy being child-free." Great. But of course, the likes of Tucker Carlson and Jesse Kelly have to give their 2 cents. Kelly describing Handler's womb to a dried up tumbleweed blowing down an old western town. That's nice. Right, Tucker. You probably know what this woman wants more than she does. After all, you're logical. Or the idea that trans men are really just confused or hysterical women. If you've spent any time, bless your heart, in any sort of conservative environment, you've probably seen this book floating around. Irreversible Damage. The transgender craze seducing our daughters. Your sons. Trans men are not delicate, confused women who just don't know what they want. They're trans men. They're men. Even transitioning isn't enough to escape misogyny. And on the flip side, trans women must be predators, right? I don't know, man. Look at the world. Look at the actual statistics. Look at Joanne Rowling's Twitter feed. Trans women are far more likely than any other group to be the victims of sexual violence. You heard that right, the victims of sexual violence. Numerous studies have shown that sexual crimes do not increase when trans women are allowed into women's spaces. A 2016 study found that 12% of transgendered people had been harassed, attacked, or sexually assaulted in the bathroom in 2015. That was 2015. Since then, violence against trans people has only increased. There's also horror story after horror story of cisgendered women being attacked in bathrooms for coming across as maybe trans. What is wrong with you people? I thought we were supposed to be the snowflakes. Guess we're scared of tomboys now. So here's my take. If they want hysterical, give them hysterical. I'd rather be hysterical and happy than bigoted and scared. Hi guys! Welcome to the end of the video. Kind of a weird one, kind of disjointed, just some thoughts that were bouncing around my mind. If you liked the video, why not give it a thumbs up, leave a comment. If you want to see more content like this, there's a subscribe button somewhere around here. If you would like to support the video, oh my goodness, thank you so much. You can do so via my Patreon or some merch. Links to both are in the link tree in the description. And a little thing should have also just popped up there that links to my Patreon. If you didn't like the video, have you tried Valium? Totally changed my life. Bye. Our main character, Mary Henry, is the sole survivor